A very good afternoon. To begin with, I must express my deep gratitude to Symbiosis International University and in particular Professor Nita Inamdar for accepting my abstract and extending your invitation to present. This is relatively a new field of my interest area. To begin with, I must confess the two things. One is the education reality is very, very contextual, very, very complex and layered. And the second confession is that education is not exactly a commodity. And the higher education institutions are not governed by any well-defined technology. So all these things put together, doing research in the field of education is somewhat very difficult. And then I'm going to discuss something which has already been, several things were highlighted in the pre-lunch session, that we are at a very formative stage. So how it is going to unfold in the next couple of years, particularly in the wake of the upheavals that we are witnessing in the geopolitical regime, is something that, I'm just going to anticipate what are the things, particularly focusing on equity and inclusion. And equity and inclusion, they don't make much sense if we don't address the issue of quality. So in my very brief presentation, I'll be beginning with the policy discourse, and I'll be raising more questions than possibly I can address. Then I'll come to the analysis of the emerging market for higher education. And within that market framework, how do I look at the question of equity and inclusion? Then I will conclude about the NEP's approach to internationalization, focusing on methodological globalism and localism and centripetal and centrifugal forces, which have been discussed in the literature. Now, I don't have an answer, but when I'm reading this UGC policy document, and these are the very key words which are important, the internationalization of Indian higher education as envisaged will provide an international dimension, and then to obtain foreign qualifications at affordable cost and make India an attractive global destination. So all these are very, very important for us to deconstruct and unravel the complexity which are embedded in this concept. So what I'm going to begin with, to provide you a very brief snapshot of the courses being offered by these universities. I did not do a very exhaustive research on all the websites. So it is a snapshot, but this is very important because when you are going to talk about equity and inclusion and quality, we have to look at the courses being offered and at what cost. So I looked at University of Southampton, University of Aberdeen, and two universities already operating at the GIFT City, Wollongong and Deakin, and you can see the courses being offered mostly in the computer science, data science, business management, and in these two, I just had a look at economics because that is my area, and economics is the only disciplinary course being offered. And the course content is customized, keeping in mind the employability of the students. These are the universities which have already, this is not an exhaustive list, so I'm going to move forward. They're coming, letter of intent have been issued, so let's see what happens. Now, when I'm talking about the quality assurance, let us see what UGC is saying. Two things. One, the faculty has to spend one full semester in India. So these are the safeguards. UGC has already thought about it. And reliance on online courses should not exceed 10% of the total courses. So, but quality that is transacted in the classroom are essentially determined by the course content, quality of the teachers and the pedagogy adopted, lab and infrastructure. So quality cannot be replicated precisely banking on the course content. who is transacting and the nature of interaction in the class and the academic ambience that prevails within the university, all these things contribute to the conceptualization of quality and its delivery. Very briefly, the fees and the scholarship. Fees are quite high. University of Deakin, I had a look at it, 39,600 Australian dollar, and bursaries and scholarships are being indeed assured as per the website, but what I found is not exceeding 20% of the total fees. Now here, the students are being viewed more as employable graduates because the research will not be undertaken at this very formative stage by these universities. So I don't expect the scholarship and the bursaries to be increased in terms of the percentage of the tuition fee because students are being viewed like this. It's not a university where the merit counts. Beyond the point. Employability is a very key factor. In fact, University of Aberdeen is going to have some courses on how to write CV and how to project oneself in the LinkedIn. And all these courses are precisely defined to contribute to and to enhance the employability of the student. So, and it's written there, career outcome built into each and every course. Now let us look at the students, because when you're talking about equity and inclusion, what is important is the student. So what I've done in this, that there are categories of universities on one hand, and there are categories of students on the other hand. And when I'm looking at the access question, two things are very important for me. One is the merit, and the second fact is the affordability. So there are 2x2 matrix, and you have got merit high, and high affordability, and then merit mediocre with high affordability, and then affordability low with merit high and merit mediocre. I'm sorry for the use of the word mediocre here. And at the top, you have the aim, those who are particularly going to do discipline-based natural sciences, right? And there the affordability and low affordability both are combined, because there are scholarship, and these category of students are actually going abroad to study in Ivy League universities. So on the producer side, I have categorized in terms of the various segments, because now Indian higher education market is integrated with the global higher education market, and so therefore there are 5 categories. What I've done, the segment 1 is the Ivy League universities, which are actually offering scholarship for the students who are going to do PhD or postdoctoral, and they get scholarship. In the second is the university just below the top ranking Ivy League, international university. There are 2 categories. In fact, I adopted this categorization from Simon Marginson's work on this area on global higher education. And at the third category, you have this IBC of the foreign universities setting up campuses here. In the Indian, there are 3 categories. The top is the IITs and institutions of eminence. The second is the global ranking of an NIRF, just below the top ranking. And the last category is the residually determined. So what is the interaction between the student on one hand and the foreign higher education institution on the other hand? This is the third row. So if you look at the very fact that the courses are expensive, so they are going to admit the merit high, those who can afford, and merit mediocre, those who can afford. Otherwise, given the scholarship, the merit high, low affordability will not be able to get access in this. And in the process, what is happening, if you look at the segment 3, then the competition is being created for the U2, International University Segment 2, not Segment 1. Segment 1 is the Ivy League universities. And at the national level, they're going to create competition for the top-level universities and the second-level universities, not the third one. Now, how do you generally analyze the international market for education? We look at, this is a market very different from a consumer goods market, but because here, the consumers compete among themselves to get into the best of the institutions. Now, what would happen, this competition among the consumers will get somewhat mitigated because of this addition or the entry of the foreign universities. And at the same time, the competition among the producers will get more intensified. So the competition will be now actually with the international universities second category and EU1 government and EU1 private. Now, when I'm looking at the top level universities, we must make a distinction between the government, the public funded, and the private funded. So the competition will be restricted more towards it. I think the last couple of rows of this table are not evident here. Now, let me come to the last part of my presentation. So the competition is very important. So one hand, the competition is getting mitigated. The other hand, the competition will get intensified. Now, when I'm looking at the global space for higher education, both competition and collaboration get wonderfully blended here. And therefore, it's very important to look at how do we gain the national universities when we are competing with them at the same time, the opportunities which are getting opened up for us. Now, so therefore, the entire issue of IBC, of foreign universities setting up campuses here, we have to look at the larger context of how NEP has envisioned or envisaged this internationalization. So I've just taken two definitions here. This is the very famous definition of Frank Knight. The internationalization at the national, sectoral, and institutional level is defined as the process of integrating. This word is very important here. Integrating an international, intercultural, global dimension into the purpose, function, or delivery of post-secondary education. Now, Marginson has recently provided a critique of the Knight's definition, and these are in bold. The imposition of a universal definition on a heterogeneous reality and diverse interests is somewhat difficult, because you can see what are the elements of internationalization, and each and every element of internationalization has a different implications for access and equity and the quality and the extent of cross-border mobility. So, and this particular interpretation, it is not acceptable that this is the best for education everywhere, global north, global south, and within, and the best for education everywhere, because of the global hegemony. Now, so how do you gain, I'm talking about India in the context of internationalization. One way of looking at it would be to look at these two forces, centripetal and centrifugal. And not only these two forces, the composition of these two forces, centripetal and centrifugal. The centripetal is drawing the world in. IBC is an example of centripetal force, and centrifugal is radiating out or intervening beyond the border. So the composition is important. So what has happened till now, that when you are looking at the centrifugal, we are trying to rein in the growth in the students' migration. I mean, they are going to pursue higher education abroad, and it's around, the stock figure is around 7, something like that. It's a very high number. And in the centripetal, around 50,000+ students have been coming in. I don't have the latest number, around 50 plus, the IHE figure. And now we are bringing in the foreign higher education institutions. In the centrifugal, therefore, there are some campuses we have set up abroad, and the students are going abroad. So you have to look at the composition, and there is an asymmetry. Because India is the second largest in the world in terms of the higher education sector, but in terms of our global positioning, there was some discussion in the pre-lunch session, we are somewhat not there particularly in the realm of knowledge generation. So the strength, how do you feature, how do you perform at the global level, we'll have to look at by the students who are going out, whether that number could be decreased. Of course, because of the geopolitics, things are going to be very different now from 26, 27. It has already, since the new president came to power in US. And when it comes to the strength, the centrifugal force will be in terms of the knowledge that India has, very unique, and that is mentioned in the national education policy. What is India's strength in the global knowledge economy? That includes our health, yoga, music, art, and Indian knowledge system. So how do you reach out to the world and contribute? What is the global positioning here? That is very important. So it is the composition of these two which is going to determine. Now, this is my last slide. So internationalization was thought of as a response to the economic globalization. Globalization is a global market, that are economic forces which dominate globalization. But when you are talking about the international branch campuses, as a part of internationalization, I'm afraid that it is almost like an economic globalization. Because why? Because the tuition fees are being fixed at a higher level with limited scope for the scholarships and all. And the scope for integration is somewhat also very limited, because if you look at the courses are not discipline-based courses. They are all market-oriented professional courses. Economics is there, but the course content, as I mentioned, is purely to enhance the employability of the student. So where is the scope for integration here, if you are looking at the courses, right? So the collaboration in research and teaching is not going to fructify at this stage. It might take a little later, because research is very, very expensive, right? So the students would prefer to go abroad and to do good research in natural sciences. Where is the scope for research here? So when you're looking at the composition of the courses, the basket of courses which are being offered here, we are further accentuating the segmentation that already exists in the higher education. We are opening up the opportunities, of course, true. But my hunch is that the purpose of bringing the foreign universities in, when you're trying to radiate out of the country in terms of global positioning in IKS, is essentially to bridge the gap in the labor market. The demand for skill, because of the fourth industrial revolution, is very rapidly rising. So are we, the Indian universities, are ready to cater to the changing demand for skill? And this is where these new courses will be filling up the gap. And then the spillover effect on Indian universities, I'm not too sure at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Dr. Soumen Chattopadhyay has been a professor at the Zakir Hussain Center for Educational Studies and JNU since 2010. And his areas include economics and education, focusing on policy making in higher education, and which was evident by the thought-provoking presentation that he made. Thank you, sir. I now invite the second speaker, Dr. Jyoti Chandiramani. Ma'am is the director of the Symbiosis School of Economics and the Dean of Faculty of Humanities and Education. And her areas of expertise include urban infrastructure, urban mobility, urban poverty, and also India's development agenda towards the SDGs.
Good afternoon. Soumen, thank you for that presentation. I think I'm going to resonate a lot of what you're going to speak, coming from the domain of economics and development economics, that too, and working on urban. So let's go straight. I'm not going to repeat what Soumen has already done, because probably we are looking at the same area, and go back to my hypothesis. So the definitions have already been talked about. There's the OECD definition, as well as the Jane Knight definition that was discussed. And of course, the way we know it, that it's the institution coming into the country, giving the degree, is really the students are in one place and the degree comes from another. So these are aspects which have even come out in the UGC document of 2022. Now, when we look at the literature review and you see how TNEs have evolved over 1990s to date, you can see that there has been a lot of transition that has happened. And that transition really goes in from motives which are propelling institutional internationalization in the 90s, coming down to 2000, where there's comparative case studies which look at shift towards a more strategic approach towards internationalization. This is, of course, taken from Wilkins and Jasola's paper of 2018. And post-2005, you could see that there were branch campuses that were coming in, the very branch campuses that we are talking about that are coming in into India now in 2005, post the NEP that was introduced in 2020. And since 2015, there's a certain emphasis on quality, on assurance, on student management, learning outcomes, and as it evolves, AI, VLEs, etc. that come in. So this is the way the TNEs have evolved, and each time how it has evolved in literature and how it's going to evolve in the market are two different things that we have to see, because it's at a very nascent stage. So what I'm presenting is really the three hypotheses that we are going to be testing, and it's out of a project which is a work in progress. So I will only be putting forward my framework to you. Coming down to the types of transnational education, you can see that there are these typical branch campuses, franchise programs, validation programs, twinning articulation, and dual degree, joint degree, online. But right now, my focus is really going to be on the offshore campus. So the models of TNE, as of October 2022 UGC guidelines, as well as 2023, and then the NEP of 2022, 2020, you can see that there are these clear-cut defined twinning arrangements, joint degree, dual degree, and foreign offshore campus arrangements. Now, the regulation and the policy has a basic checklist in place. It has a checklist on quality, it has a checklist on transparency, it talks about an annual report, it talks about a website, it talks about definition of campus, it talks about eligibility, and all this is very clear, so the ground rules are there before they have come in. But we are going to look at this from the point of view of equity, from the point of view of inclusion, and then from the point of view of innovation. The fee structure, we have already, Somen has showed you, and I'm also going to show you a fee structure in my hypothesis to justify the framework. And faculty appointed, as he said again, they are supposed to be there for a semester and not just hop in and hop out as visiting briefcase professors, and not online, but within a campus. But my question here is this going to be able to be monitored? Because we are very good with talking about what it is, but the ground reality is who's going to monitor it? How is it going to be monitored? And of course, infrastructure and quality. And here is where, at least when it comes to the infrastructure, if you have governments dole out, land to, create an EduCity, etc., then obviously it's going to have its agglomeration, which is going to get even further become a super agglomeration, which is Mumbai, the fourth Mumbai that has got created with an infrastructure completely there. So here is another point. And again, as we talk about curriculum and assessment, so what curriculum and what assessment? Because the programs that are coming into the market are the very sexy programs, which are anyway not anything much to do with STEM. And as Somen said, there's just one economics in the 15 campuses that are coming in. And of course, economics is different. We are looking more at STEM for innovation, for R&D and, patents, etc. But that is not what has as yet come in. This is just giving you a little geographical field that you have the gift city, you have the EduCity, you have it in Gurugram. So again, it is in the metropolitan regions. Again, it's in the big cities. And how does somebody from tier 2, tier 2 is also acceptable, but tier 3, tier 4, and from the rural, how are they going to negotiate this journey? Are we going to make it convenient for them? Really going to create this pipeline? Because in my opinion, I feel education, the way it has evolved in India, has created another caste system or a class system. It's got stratified and it's getting further stratified, but we need to bring in measures which are implementable. So when you look at this, you can see what are the programs coming in: business analytics, data analytics, financial technology. It's already been talked about, and other than a couple of them. So you can see where again they are. And with the outbound mobility, now there's a twin effect. Of course, you have to look at it from the economics of it also. Am I saying that TNEs don't need to come into the country? No, I'm not saying that. They do come in, but how are we going to gain out of it? So it's the type of programs that come in. And when you look at the outbound mobility, this is a NITI Aayog report 2025, which is giving you the stock. And so the stock has gone up, but if you look at the flow has gone down. So the flow has gone down, and that is there with the Ministry of External Affairs data, which sees that from 2023, after COVID, it has gone up, but after that, you can actually see that the flow of students going out have come down. But again, are they really going to be attracted to this? The TNEs that are there, are they going to be attracted? As Somen rightly put it, you're going to put the institutions of eminence on the one side, and you have the TNEs that are coming in, they're going to compete, and really the people at the margins are again going to be left out. So unless and until there is a clear and straight policy, as followed by a lot of leading Ivy universities in their home countries, if that kind of a policy is brought in over here, then that's something that is, a part of our project to review as we take it forward. So the motivation of the study was really the NEP document. It was not only the NEP document and its basic, it's also our own past work that we have done with Chandiramani, Majumdar and Nayak and other papers that we have written, which motivated us because very everywhere we have talked about education being an equalizer, which is also a part of NEP. And of course, my central research question is, can TNE offshore campuses meaningfully address the goals of equity, inclusion, innovation, as explicitly articulated in NEP 2020, or do they reinforce existing hierarchies in India, in India's higher education system? I just did a little bit of maths out here, little arithmetic, and when I look at the number of universities in the US, China, India, UK, and then I see the number of students enrolled over there, and I just take a per capita university kind of a thing. Then you find that with India, you find that there are 33,333 students per university if you take the number of universities at 1358. But we obviously need to bring this down. So there's a need for expansion, but what type of an expansion? And our study, that is the earlier study, which was our motivation, doesn't necessarily say that universities can be the response. It could be just more institutions which can bring in degrees in that sense, can provide education which could be more inclusive as well as bring in more equity. So diversification and equity sensitive expansive strategy has to be followed. In the discussion and analysis here, we are again putting the argument that the GER, gross enrollment ratio, in India, according to the World Bank report, recently it has inched up to 34. They are obviously getting the data from here, but our official data is at 28.4, would have gone up to 29, and we are envisaging it to go up to 50 by 2035. There is a need for institutional expansion, whether you want to call it university or institutions. There's a thing. There is uneven progress. Why do I say uneven progress? Because 400 districts still do not have universities. If we have to look at it at a unit of administration, 400 districts out of almost 800 districts in the country do not have universities. This is not necessarily a condition, but it's there on record. Quality and access concerns are definitely an issue which will only time will tell us. But at this junction, there is a perceived notion that, and there is data also which tells us, there is literature which tells us that there is a difference in perception of education, whether it is with the private sector or with other sectors. So there are different institutions which are ranked. You have the NIRF rankings, you have the NAC rankings, and out of that you have so many which are unranked universities and unranked institutions. So moving forward, the pre-existing debate, quality, affordability, and equity that is there are adequate. I need 5 minutes. Yeah, but then it would be, I have not even addressed my point, okay? So Gupta and Deb 2021, Deb 2023, and there are various papers which identify these issues. I straight come to my first hypothesis. I'll skip this and go to my 3 hypotheses. HE1, equity, is TNE equity enhancing or elite reinforcing. All right. And here the economic exclusion barrier happens because the fee structure that we've seen is anyway going to be exclusionary. We'll have to address it probably after a year or two to see how many people have come in on scholarships based on merit or scholarships based on students belonging to SEDGs. There is going to be limited redistribution in this regard, and this is only what time will be able to tell us. So this is with respect to the first hypothesis. Here we have talked about, again, elite institutions and compared the fees with a business analytics course, just exactly what Saumen did. Does TNE promote social inclusion or institutional exclusion? This is my second hypothesis. And the institutions in India exhibit limited inclusivity, systematically underrepresenting socioeconomically disadvantaged groups due to structural, geographical, and institutional barriers. And therefore, what are we going to do with respect to policy too? That is why my title is Looking at These from the Policy Lens, and how we can sensitize various stakeholders to make this more inclusive. So this is my second hypothesis. And systemic innovations are islands of excellence. Here, I think we know that equity and inclusion are going to be a little difficult to achieve. But can TNEs, with the format that they're coming in, can we nudge them to bring in what India needs? India is presently at 38 in the innovation index. We need to move to 25. We need to get there. And one of the pillars of innovations is education. While government has been the major contributor to the innovation cycle, as a pillar, private sector is lacking. Can education fill that gap and bring in these kind of collaborations? So here, will TNEs bring about this? Because we need to have a paper there to say, this is what can be done, will this be done, and then assess after a few years whether this has been done. So given this, these are certain policy prescriptions which I think are really too much at a nascent stage, which I won't want to talk about. So these are the three hypotheses on which we have put our construct: equity, innovation, and equity, inclusion, and innovation. Thank you so much.
May I now invite the third presenter, Dr. Aparna Hebbani. She is a senior lecturer in Communication and Media Studies and affiliate of the Center of Communication and Social Change at the University of Queensland. Her research focuses on migration, refugee settlement, media representation, and intercultural communication. She has authored books and numerous peer-reviewed publications and contributes to understanding social inclusion and cultural diversity through media and communication research that informs policy and practice. I now invite Dr. Aparna to present their work on understanding barriers and facilitators to students' interactional competence within diverse Australian university classrooms.
So I'm going to wake you out of your food coma. And my presentation for the next 10 minutes is completely different to anything that you've been hearing today because it's outside of India. So what happens when our students go overseas? What happens when they face instructors like me? What are the issues that I face when I have international students in my classroom? So as you can understand, so our subject, inherently everything that we're discussing today is very interdisciplinary. So what I'm positing here is not something just from me, from the School of Communication, but my co-authors are from the School of Education, understandably so, as well as School of Linguistics and Cultures. And Noriko is very well known globally for her work on interactional competence. So just wanted, they were unable to join today. So what am I talking about? Just to give you a brief context about where I work. Okay, so UQ, in short, we've got 60,000 students enrolled in our university. It's what's called a GO8. It's a sandstone university in Australia. And out of which 40% are international. So that's a fairly huge number. From 141 countries, and most of them are from China. So that poses a lot of issues for us as teachers. Many undergraduate students, but we also have diversity within the classroom from the local population. So it's not only about technically international students on visas, but also folks from rural regional Australia, from children of second generation migrants. Then you've got folks who are first in family, which is a term for first in family to ever go to university. So no one has ever been to university before. We've got students from non-English speaking backgrounds, and you put all of these students in your classroom. What happens, okay, for the students, and what happens for us as teachers. How do you then cope with that? And Shweta this morning started off the first session by mentioning macro, meso, micro. So I'm looking at the micro. I'm not looking at the macro. Most presentations today have been at the macro level. But I'm talking more about what happens at the grassroots, where the rubber meets the road. How do you then handle and deal with this internationalization? So in Australia, our mode of delivery of teaching is very different. We've got traditionally a lecture, which is one-way communication, me talking here right now for an hour. And then the students break out and they go into tutorials where you might be in a group of 25 students for 2 hours, 2.5 hours, and they are expected to do activities. But for example, I have been teaching at UQ for the past 19 years. When I started, and I'm in a HAS faculty, I'm in humanities and social sciences. I'm not in a STEM faculty, okay? So in our courses, we expect a lot of communication, right? I teach within the School of Communication. The activities require you to mingle and talk and do stuff in groups. But what happens when I started 19 years ago, I had 100% Australian students in my class, Caucasian, Australian. And now, I have 99% Chinese. I am lucky. Last semester, I had 0 Australian students. This semester, I have 3. I've made progress. But what happens when you've got 120 students who are sitting in front of you who have a translation app open? Mandarin to English, English to Mandarin. And they can't actually communicate with you even though they've got a sufficient high 6.5 IELTS score to get admission. How am I supposed to teach that student? And then they just sit in tables, they sit in groups speaking Mandarin. And by the way, I don't understand Mandarin. Okay, so those are practical issues in the classroom when you're expecting equity, you're expecting inclusion, you're expecting significant intercultural skills to be developed and getting the experience of what is it like to be in Australia or Australian culture when everyone else in the classroom is Chinese. You actually are not mingling with any Australian because they simply aren't there. So what we are looking at exploring is what is the interaction that happens between a bunch of really, really diverse students. So diversity is a very broad word because who considers themselves diverse here, right? I mean, where is the measuring stick? What's the yardstick for diversity? So how do you then look at improving a student's interactional competence? How do you get them to improve, to actually make classroom participation? How do you get them to talk? And we are having problems with AI, okay? AI and secure assessment. So there is a big move to move away from, let's say, literature reviews, because we don't need to do that anymore. Claude does that better than I do, okay? I'm joking, don't take me seriously. But we are shifting away to oral assessments, on-the-spot assessment. Talk to me. Give me a presentation on a topic that I give to you on the spot. And then I will assess you on that. I will give you marks on that, because then that becomes authentic assessment. Okay? So we are having to learn new ways of assessing, but what do you do when you've got Chinese students who can't actually talk or give an oral presentation in English in an institution where the mode of education is English? They can't submit an assessment in Mandarin. And so you need to have intercultural competence. How do you then cope with other students? I might have folks from the Netherlands, Singapore, Malaysia, South Korea, Japan, everyone sitting next to each other, Indonesia. And how do they then talk and communicate with each other when you're coming from so many cultures? You're coming from outback Australia into a metropolitan city, sitting next to folks from 10 different countries. How does that impact you as a student? Are we really helping these students learn? I mean, they pay big fees, right? They're paying fees 30 lakhs, 40 lakhs, 50 lakhs. What are they getting in return? How do you then build intercultural competence? So we lean upon Bordeaux And many of you might have heard of Urdu, and students don't come in with equal level of cultural capital. And so that is a big issue when it helps to shed light on inequalities within the classroom space. Okay? And this needs time. And how do you then build intercultural competence and interactional competence for all the students who come from such diverse backgrounds, such different linguistic capabilities? It's a huge problem. And I'm not sure if this is something that is an issue in the Indian classroom. Yeah, I'm almost done. So there are lots of barriers, but we also need to look at facilitators. How can you help teachers? What resources do teachers need? I want to teach better. I want to ensure that my students actually learn from what I say. They need to be able to understand me. And I'm not sure if that's too much of an expectation, but I can't sleep at night if I feel I haven't done my job right. And, it's they are my, in a way, consumers. So even though universities have classes on how do you write better, there's not that backup system, there's not that coaching on how do you speak better, how do you improve your communication within the classroom. So there's a lot of room for exploration and research, and that's something that we are trying to do. How much of the onus lies on the university? How much of the onus lies on the student? And is there a happy medium? Does it need to be both who need to do better? And how do you actually measure interactional competence reliably and with validity? So those are my closing thoughts. I wonder if Australia is behind the game. Symbiosis Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. And Symbiosis has had international students for a very long time, thanks to Muzamdar sir. And how is the classroom here at Symbiosis when you've got students from across the world coming in to study? So, and is there a value in assessing using AI? One of our speakers mentioned that, but I'm not sure if that is the solution, to be quite honest. Thank you. I'm done.
Do we have questions?
Thank you very much for your presentation. This actually ties in with my work with international students. Your presentation rather raised questions. I'm Moushami Mukherjee from O.P. Jindal Global University. By the way, I have studied myself in Australia at University of Melbourne. Melbourne, yeah. So I am curious to know, how do you deal with the problem that you raised? That was not clear in your presentation. The transition that you have seen yourself from a white Caucasian Australian students in the classroom to these Chinese students who are not able to communicate, and especially, with the transition of assessment modes to more oral presentation in the context of AI. Right, so it wasn't clear from your presentation, like what are you doing actually? Because I would really like to know and learn from what you're doing or thinking of or planning of doing.
So I can only talk about myself. This research is still at its nascent stage.
Okay.
We haven't actually started any data collection because even getting ethical approval for something like this is very hard at UQ.
Right.
So what I have done is, I am now friends with all my students on this Chinese platform called WeChat, which is the equivalent of
Yes.
WhatsApp.
Yeah,
They don't have
yeah,
WhatsApp.
yeah,
So
yeah.
they've got WeChat. So they're just over the moon that I'm on WeChat with them. I tell them I can't speak Mandarin, but I know Ni Hao and Shishi. So I talk to them with a bit of Mandarin, but that's all I can do. And I have to coach them to be able to speak without a script. See, they're learners. They're rote learners. They just memorize everything, quite like Indians.
Yes.
And so it really causes them a lot of anxiety if they have to get up and speak on the spot. Because they haven't, in Indian terms, they haven't by-hearted anything. Okay, you can't by heart, and you can't use AI. I don't allow them to use devices in my classroom. So I put them, but I practice. I practice a lot till it comes to an assessment time, and where they build confidence slowly. So practice makes perfect. I can't give them an assessment at one shot without holding their hands and taking them through.
Okay.
So those are some of the strategies that I employ, but I think we need to look at it as a larger, they bring so much money. right? They're a huge, the university runs with 40% Chinese, international students paying international fees. But then what are we doing to improve the quality of delivery for these students? Yeah, they can't submit in Mandarin. That's not allowed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for
I'm not
sharing
sure
this.
if I answer your question, but
No,
I
thank
just
you.
do what I can
But
do.
I'll talk to you more later
Yeah,
on.
would love to. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Aparna, for striking so many chords when it comes to being in the class and shouldering the responsibility of making the teaching learning meaningful for the learners who are looking up to you with so much of expectation, apart from the content that you're delivering, because today content is easily available. Now I have Dr. Pranjali Kirloskar, who works in the capacity of International Office Manager. She is an international higher education specialist with extensive experience in global academic partnerships, European university alliances, and mobility programs. Her work focuses on strengthening intercultural learning, academic cooperation, and inclusive education opportunities, contributing to enhanced global engagement and sustainable higher education networks. I now invite Dr. Pranjali to present her work on ethical internationalization, how universities navigate partnerships and mobility in times of conflict.
Dear colleagues, thank you for giving me this opportunity to present at this very wonderful conference. It's my privilege actually that I've been able to attend this conference for the second time this time, and only grateful for this opportunity. Without further ado, I would like to introduce my topic, and I think we've gone over transnational education since morning, and we realized that it's a model of global openness, which is, essentially built to bring institutions together, make them collaborate across borders. But essentially what happens when the context to actually, context on which these universities or institutions collaborate on, that very context kind of becomes disrupted. And that's the topic that I'm going to deal with. That is, how do universities navigate partnerships and mobilities in times of conflict? And so one distinction is that how this differs from internationalization of higher education and how transnational education is slightly different is that while mobility of students and staff happens to be a central part of internationalization of higher education, transnational education is more about crossing borders by the institutions, the institutional presence across borders, and probably I'll move to the slides before introducing it further. So I'll not get into the definition of transnational education, but if you see, we are basically talking about branch campuses, we're talking about educational hubs, validated program partnerships, and so on and so forth. What is important is that unlike mobility-based internationalization, TNE is defined by relocation of institutions rather than movement of students. So the relocation embeds universities with host university, host country regulatory mechanisms or regulatory restrictions, I would say, and also the political and economic ecosystems. So essentially, when universities are operating beyond borders, they are sort of embedded into functioning according to the jurisdictions or the systemic guidelines of that host country. Such embeddedness, what happens due to this is that it creates a structural exposure to geopolitical conditions which is beyond the institutional control. And this kind of complicates. So TNA is not only operationally complex, well it is, but the conditions in which it actually operates makes it even more complex. So the conditions could be due to the, say, the regulatory, political, or economic systems in which they are in which they are functioning, and also the geopolitical, say, conflicts, or well, in the times that we are in, it becomes even more turbulent, or rather, I would say, tricky to actually take a stand and navigate through these ethical dilemmas. So the focus of my presentation today is not really finding solutions to these ethical dilemmas. It is not really about how do you resolve these dilemmas that as institutions, what are the ethical tensions that stakeholders face, but rather actually focusing on how do we navigate through these ethical tensions. How is it that universities or in what are the kind of ethical tensions that universities actually have to respond to if they have to, sort of survive in this kind of turbulent geopolitical environment. So there's no solution. I'm not coming up with any, one size fits all, because in the times, like I said, we are in, there is no one common solution, and it's almost like a constant journey. So yes, so we're going to looking at higher education in times of conflict. TNE and the geopolitical exposure, I'll probably just put all this here. Yeah. So, like I said, institutions have to actually function across multiple jurisdictions, and there are overlapping, and I think this was touched upon in one of the previous presentations, that there are overlapping guidelines or systems which kind of make it even more tricky to sort of take a stand and actually decide which jurisdiction does it fall under, which law kind of applies to a particular case. Hence, there is this intersection, or rather a conflict between institutional values and also geopolitical instability and policy misalignment. Education hubs intensify this exposure due to their reliance on stable global positioning. So the problem is that as higher education institutions, the reputation, their global positioning, I would say the global engagement is extremely critical for any institution. And when that kind of gets a little shaken by the regulatory or the political environment, that in itself becomes a difficult game to survive. So universities may face competing expectations from home and host country, which is another challenge for them, and as well as which basically means that vulnerability in TNE is very much embedded. It's very structural to its being, and ethical tensions, which I will get to what these tensions or dilemmas are that they have to fight out, are the very nature of how TNE works. So while we have been talking about, and I think we've had various perspectives as to, of course, the students' well-being matters, but also from a stakeholder's perspective, it's a different ballgame altogether, because for them to survive in another country, I'm especially talking about if you actually have a physical campus abroad, calls in for very deliberate, long-term kind of commitment and oversight, which is, so if you talk about the mobility-based internationalization, where we are talking more about not only, but more about, say, student or staff mobility, the idea or the option of withdrawing or I would say tweaking the mobility scenario, the exchange scenario, is slightly more feasible compared to what it would be for a stakeholder who has put in resources and infrastructure in building something outside. Yeah, so it could be disruptive in many ways as to how and why institutions could go through difficult times, but okay, so I'm going to rush this through. Basically, just to sum this up, that there could be problems with accreditation, staffing, program delivery, and so on. And this could be due to the different contextual cases that we are into. Why is it an ethical issue? Because, well, it's a big trade-off. There are institutional values, and then there are, contextual expectations. When they come at an intersection, and if they are misaligned, then that's when the conflict starts. I think I've already spoken about all these points in my previous slides. It's just that I'd put it out here. Contextualizing, so the four ethical tensions that I'm talking about are, one is continuity versus caution. And this is something that every institution has to sort of consider, is that they have made investments, they have put in a lot of money, time, effort, everything that has gone into it, and which basically means that it's very difficult to sort of give up on that when say a conflict strikes, or there are times of war, and survival is so difficult. So while there is an inherent urge to continue, but there's also an excessive necessity to exercise caution at the same time. And then if you see, there are different interests which are out there, say student interests, parents of the students, faculty, and so on. So student well-being and staff well-being also becomes paramount. And then to balance that with the expectations of caution becomes tricky. Next is neutrality versus responsibility. So while each university might want to be a responsible institution, it might not be the most viable option. And hence, universities might want to exercise neutrality by not taking a stand, but that could be perceived in a very negative light as well, that they are disengaging and not wanting to take a stand at all. Inclusion versus restriction, and I think this, I won't go into details about this, but we've spoken about access and inclusion, and I think TNA to a large extent in different facets can actually question the idea of access, because when we are talking about who can actually access transnational education, probably there are different stratas of society which can and which cannot, which becomes a bit more tricky, and as a result, TNE remains unequal, uneven across different student groups. Last one is autonomy versus compliance. And this is something that I think we have touched upon again, is that while higher education institutions are global actors, they're still expected to function as within the national context that they are in. And this dilemma of having to respond to, or rather align themselves to the host country's expectations or guidelines while keeping their institutional values at place kind of can become a bit tricky again. So autonomy versus compliance can also be at loggerheads. Which brings me to the conclusion is that, like I said, ethical dilemmas are a facet of transnational educations, especially for the stakeholders who are on the other side of the table, who are managing the show. And ethical dilemmas arise when they are, when there is a conflict between values and the constraints that they are put into. And it is important to understand that the decision making on these ethical dilemmas it does not just comprise of like operational decision or administrative decision making, but it is something that is even more deeper, which needs much more commitment or other a long-term oversight. And no institutional response is without trade-offs, so there's always some compromise. You kind of give up on something and you kind of weigh your pros and cons and then make a decision. Yeah, so basically TNE should be understood as an ethically situated practice and not an isolated one. And this is my list of references. Sorry I had to rush, but 10 minutes were really not enough. Thank you.
Are there any questions for Dr. Pranjali? I have one question.
Sure.
So the question that the last but one dilemma about inclusion and the very nature of transnational education, as pointed out by so many scholars, where you say that an inequality is inherent. While studying this, have you kind of come across any studies where, and I would also try to build upon what Dr. Aparna has presented, that if we could start small, right, maybe if we could address this problem first in the classrooms maybe, can transnational education become a kind of equalizer or even a bit of leveler when it comes to different strata of the society? Have you come across any such literature, or what are your views on this?
So I did come across something of a similar situation, but one of the recommendations was to move it online or have it hybrid, but that also has its own catch because digital access is not a given. So for some, it might be might not be a possibility. But I kind of concur with professors' ideas about actually having in-person dialogue or having those kind of assessments, not just for TNE, but even I would say for classroom interactions, because that's one way to not let AI feature in. So,
absolutely. Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. May I now invite Dr. Shakila to present her views?
So good afternoon, and I think a round of applause for all the presenters is most befitting. I think since morning, I've had the privilege of listening to the previous sessions and the chairs summing up their discussions. And the dilemmas that we look at from the point of view of higher education seem to be reflected even in TNE. So I don't think we are looking at a different set of dilemmas over here at all. It's only that the subset that we are looking at adds to a certain degree of complexity because of the very nature of the clientele that we are dealing with, because we are dealing with institutions that don't belong within this country, and we are trying to sort of arrive at solutions that resonate with the NEP goals of access, equity, equality, accountability, and affordability. So if you look at these 5 goals, when you look at what our last presenter said about autonomy and compliance, it brings in the regulatory part of it, of accountability and so on. When you look at the main theme that we had in today's presentation, which is on equity, it's all about how you're trying to reach out to the SCDGs and to all the cross sections. So actually when we're looking at the entire gamut of TNE, which is, I would say, a higher generation of internationalization of higher education, because we've moved through a phase where we're talking about cross-border education and so on, and then talking about the institutional mobility, which facilitates the kind of credit mobility that comes to the students through a variety of models. Now the NEP, when trying to put forward this idea, and maybe I could urge this audience not just to look at the internationalization of higher education as we put it in our 66-page document, but even in the 484-page committee's report, the rationale that we were trying to look at was a much larger rationale. When we use the term, and which at certain times are not even understood in the spirit that we wrote it, that we want India to become a Vishwa Guru, then you find a lot of critical comments coming in about, very, very snide remarks about where are we looking at that kind of an image when India has a lot of its own problems in the domestic space itself, and then how are we projecting ourselves? But that does not prevent us from becoming aspirational. Now, the 4 presentations that came in today, I just set the context because my strength comes in, I think my strength that Neetaji tried to sort of bring into this session is because I looked at equity and inclusion in the national education policy. And so, Dr. Soman, I must say the dilemmas that I'm trying to locate where Dr. Yeah. Okay. Dr. Soman, when you put in that point of, foreign universities coming over here, it takes me back to when 2006 I was in the Planning Commission, and when we were examining the National Knowledge Commission reports at that time coming in, and then the government then thinking of bringing about the Foreign Education Providers Bill. Even at that stage, Professor Varghese will remember, though I think he was still in IHE at that time, but you'll still remember at that time the dilemmas that we were looking at. Is that for the point of view of inclusion, should we have reservation? Should we have a certain kind of an embargo? These concerns came in, and now revisiting those concerns in the context of the foreign universities coming in, and I must say there has been a dilution from what we wrote in the committee's report. In the committee's report, we clearly indicated it's the top 100 universities. And in the actual, the executive order that has come out, it's not the top 100. Dr. Pani and all of us will agree to that. We also very clearly had said it's a legislative route and not an executive regulation. So there are 2 major deviations from what was written in the committee's report and what really got implemented on ground. Dr. Pani will understand that there is a huge gap between what has been said in the policy and what has come out. So in terms of the concerns that you're looking at, it is a market-driven decision. It's a market-driven decision. Now the question is whether we as a nation should look at the commodification of education and therefore try to look at transnational education as one leverage for let us say, showing that we are equally capable of economic sort of dimensions to become a powerful nation. So to be in the league of powerful nations, should we use education, which fundamentally as a policy we've always said is a public good, right? A public merit good. Whether we would really like to see that in terms of really seeing it being commodified and marketized in a manner that we think of it as a consumer product kind of a thing. So the dimension is very much there. Now, the stratification that comes, it's like two spectrums. On one side, the elite, and the other side, the massification. But it's always like the Hobbesian theory. You can't have a thesis and only the antithesis. You always have to have a synthesizing. So between the shades of white and black, you have these shades of gray, and to each his own. So the kind of clientele that might come in to these institutions, to some extent would have been an economic decision to prevent the kind of drain of revenue. But on another side, it would also have been a very indigenous reason that we might not be wanting to send our students outside and therefore retain that. So from the brain drain to the brain gain to the talent circulation and the entire brain circulation that we now call are all imperatives that would have come in our decision to set up the foreign universities. The question is whether we talked about COIL, I think Dia had mentioned about it, whether that could be one of the alternatives that we can, but then we should be very, very conscious about the digital divides that are there and whether that would add to another complexity in terms of that. So thank you, Dr. Somin, for bringing out that critiquing of it. But at the same time, as I said, let us not try to think of TNE as a prestige economy, but actually trying to have a positive sum knowledge economy. So I think in that light, I would try and conclude that point. And since the VBSA bill is under with the Joint Parliamentary Committee, what would be the VBSA bill did talk about, the existing regulations relating to the foreign education providers being as they are, but we need to look at it in a very, very nuanced manner. Dr. Chandiramani and others have talked about a work in progress. And again, I think she's brought about, let me try and locate her also. Yeah. So again, she's been trying to talk about the intent that is there in the policy and what is the outcome that we need to, and whether we should be focusing about reducing the outbound mobility or whether we would like to have better brands that are coming in over here, and whether a new kind of islands of excellence will start happening because of the edu-cities that we are creating by the locational advantages of some of these very huge infrastructure that have gone around creating these campuses. Now, whether we would like to see that we should move away from a policy of permission to a policy of purpose can be a point of debate that we need to look in, and whether also that we bring inclusion as central to the whole idea of transnational education. That, I think, remains a primary concern. The one background that our friend who teaches at Queensland University, it resonates so much with India. Our classrooms are highly diverse. So while you are talking about the challenge of dealing with Chinese students who speak Mandarin, when NEP talked about multilingualism and said for the first time that higher education can be taught bilingually or into regional languages, we are grappling with the first generation learners, we are grappling with the people who come in from non-English backgrounds and so on. And the question is, handling student diversity and a heterogeneous student population, be it in any part of the world, remains the same challenge. And therefore, the question is of combining not just technology like our friend, it was our friend, the person who chaired the other session, Prabhu, yes. When he talked about language as being an issue. The fact remains that having an AI really adds to the advantage of it. But the same thing is about also the mutual cultural recognition and seeing cultural diversity not as an impediment, but as a strength. And I think that is where the whole idea of education cuts across the intersections and really brings in a very amalgamated and integrated society. So I really don't think that, that is something, maybe I would put it the other way around, that maybe the University of Queensland has a lot to take away from our institutions here, where all of us here, when we started teaching in multilingual classrooms, did face those kind of challenges, and I think we overcame that. So the fact that we overcame that itself should be a point of strength for you. But in any case, if the students do not participate, then there is definitely an exclusion that takes place. And so that remains a challenge, and the question is, I don't know, here we have said all our entrance examinations now we conduct in about 8 to 10 languages. Whether Australia would like to pick up threads from here, because depending on what is the kind of migration that has come in, and thanks to the changing geopolitical situation, as Dr. Somen said, we might not see that kind of thing because there's a lot of inward nationalism that is reflected in the geopolitical world. Dr. Pranjali's presentation talking about the 4 ethical tensions really reflect what has been happening since morning on our discussions. I'm trying to locate her. Yeah. So since morning that we are looking at, and that the whole issue of mobility and the disruptions that come with it, and the partnerships, therefore, that come under the strain, are all central to what we talked about, plagiarism and the use of AI being ethical. The question is, any policy that encourages collaborations that happen and where we allow for campuses to come in over here, thanks, Sophia, we should not be looking at it with a jaundiced eye. We cannot afford to do that. Having taken a stand that we allow for our institutions to come here and we allow for our institutions to go outside, I don't think SIMBI would like its Dubai campus to be seen as a kind of someone who's come from outside. Professor Varghese has been there on the board. You'd like to see it getting integrated over there. So the question is of keeping the fundamental idea of being ethical, to be able to integrate, not to view them, because you see, when we wrote that about allowing foreign universities also, they said that we were adding to a very unfair system of competition. That's wrong. Competitiveness is not a bad word. Competitiveness is the very generation and the foundation of excellence. And we must nurture it at the individual level, at the institutional level, and at the national level. So competitiveness is never a bad word. And competitiveness does not mean it is unethical at all. When you see a cricket match or a football match, you watch it by the rules of the game. And you always win. Whoever is the winner of the game. So when you look at any kind of competition that is coming in, the presumptive competition that comes in, it is there, no doubt. But the fact remains that you ensure that you follow the rules of the game and you lay it out right at the beginning, not that you add to that, different varying sets of rules as we go along. That's where my concern comes in about the VBSA bill in the context of all this that has been happening. So I would put this whole session as looking at, there were 4 major presentations. One which is looking at, let us say, economic efficiency versus ethical responsibility. So I think paper 1 was about whether it is an economically efficient one, and paper 4 is about ethical responsibility. The other one I would say would be one where it is policy-driven inclusion, which is coming from her, and I think the lived classroom experience which has come in from paper 3. So I think overall, it's about global aspirations versus local realities, the one that we talked about earlier, about the Tier 2 and the Tier 3 cities. But if you remember the opening address given by His Excellency, he said you learn in one place, you work in another place. So the world is, the globe is like a village today. And I think that's what this session brings out. The whole question is what Sayanthan had talked about, whether equitable internationalization will leave out what we call as neoliberal universities. Let us not make ethics be only a decoration in the whole world of TNE, but that it becomes center stage and remains the foundation of it. So thank you all for wonderful presentations. And I think if there are any questions for the chair, I'm happy to take that. And congratulations once again to the presenters.